Good evening, everybody. Happy Thursday. It's Alex again, and welcome back to my channel. My hair down this time. I always have it in braids, almost always have it in braids to like protect my curls, and then I forget to take them out, or like I'm worried that like I'll get damaged if I take them out. But I'm actually getting a haircut tomorrow morning. So I don't want to take much off, just enough for it to be healthy again. I'm going to get in some layers, like a little bit of a shag, um, kind of a retro vibe. And so I wanted to have my hair down for the video, just as like a record. Like it's actually like longer than the camera is going to show. Um, it's the longest easily that it's been in years. I don't know if the camera or the mic caught that, but Jasper's talking. um, Anyway, welcome back to my channel, and this evening I am excited. I am doing another review. It's my first movie review for the channel, and I'm also excited because not only am I scripted this time, I printed it. I thought ahead to print it. So I should have an easier time like referring to it, and also less chance of it getting possibly knocked over by a cat. Because last time I had my laptop propped up on a suitcase, and that almost ended in catastrophe. So, as I kind of already spoiled, tonight's video is the first adaptation of Anne Rice's novels 1994's Interview with a Vampire. So, some basic stats, once again, just to make sure that like I get everything. Although I do know, going back over this, I think I remembered this earlier in the afternoon, and then I forgot it again because ADHD. I didn't include content warnings in the script. I can still do that because I still have the copy online, so I can add that in. It's pretty much all the same as the book. And so this video has a little bit of a content warning with, for instance, the death of a child. But actually, this video is going to be more content warning wise. It's going to concern homophobia, biphobia, misogyny, and I don't know a very succinct way to put it except the fact that a child was forced to kiss a grown man. Again, I come to you with all the fun videos. Sarcasm, by the way. I hope that was clear. I'm still getting used to camera and like learning how to speak as like myself in real life on camera. So, again, the 1994 film adaptation of Interview with a Vampire, it was directed by Neil Jordan. Tom Cruise starred as Lestat, which I remember hearing Anne Rice was like initially against. Like she took out like a full page ad in a newspaper or a magazine, like just criticizing that casting choice. And then after she saw his performance, she like changed her mind and loved him as a character. And so I think remembering back to when I first watched the movie, which was I think after I saw episode 1 of the TV show. I did things in such a strange order. I remember that it took me a little while to warm up to his performance. I think the first time I really saw Lestat, like a glimpse, the scene in like the dining room with the rat. I really saw him when he comes crashing through the window. Louis set the house on fire, the plantation house on fire. And he comes crashing to the window, and he's like barely hit the floor before he starts bitching. That was when I was kind of like won over by his performance. Brad Pitt is Louis, who I know like gets lots of accusations of phoning it in, and I get it, and I'm not really bothered by it. I don't know that I see it as strongly as other people do. I know that he was apparently miserable on set, and I think for me, Lestat and Claudia are characters that just jump off the page. They are like Lestat. He is a very dramatic individual. And then you have, Claudia, who takes after Lestat in many ways, and who is, a adult trapped in the body of a little girl. They jump off the page, and I think it could be really easy for Louis to get lost in the midst of to be overshadowed by the drama queens. And it's something they have to be really careful to avoid. And so I think that's the risk there, is you're so focused on whatever Lestat's doing, whatever Claudia's doing, and then in comparison, it could be a little bit harder to relate to Louis, which I don't think is anything to do with Brad Pitt necessarily. Kirsten Dunst as Claudia does an amazing job. Christian Slater as Daniel Malloy, and Antonio Banderas as Armand. And I'll get to a little bit more about Antonio Banderas in a bit. The makeup and prosthetics were done by Stan Winston. I'm gonna geek out a little bit over back to the actual basic stats portion of this video. I'm gonna geek out a tiny bit about Stan Winston's school. They did the makeup and the prosthetics for Interview with a Vampire, so that includes the kind of zany faces. Also includes the prosthetic that they developed, created, tested for when Claudia slits Lestat's throat. Trigger warning for death, I guess, or attempted murder, at least. And it's so cool, and they can explain it a million times better. They have explained it, but it's this whole prosthetic that just goes right here, and it's so cool. At the same time or about the same time, I believe, as they were working on Interview with a Vampire, there was another movie that came out the same year, 1994, and they were working on that one as well. Big year for them, 1994. And that movie was Jurassic Park. So yeah, the same people that created the Velociraptor costumes, let's see if I can pronounce this right, Dilophosaurus? Did I get the one that gets Nedry with the frills? And Rexy herself, the whole animatronic for Rexy, the same company that did that built Rexy. Never gonna get over that. Amazing. I love her. Okay, I love Rexy. I also love Blue. Blue and Rexy are they are two of my top 3 favorite Jurassic Park characters. The other one's Laura Dern. Just here for the ladies, okay? Anyway, same company that did the dinosaurs for Jurassic Park worked on Interview with a Vampire, and they have a YouTube channel, and they have videos from that time period of them developing the throat prosthetic and testing it, as well as all the videos for the dinosaurs. So cool. Love it. Geeking over for now. So just summary now, I guess. Very much the same as the book. It is fairly beat by beat, I would say. So I'm really going to focus on a couple of the things that are in the book that didn't make it into the movie. There's an entire section of the book where Louis and Claudia are traveling through Europe looking for other vampires. That doesn't really make the cut. Louis has a narration about it, and you see like Claudia's drawings that she's doing on the ship. Was really summarized in that way. Paul and the rest of Louis' family from the book do not appear. We'll be covering that a lot more later in the video. And then there's this whole like section subplot with a character named Babette and her brother, who is not a very upstanding individual and ends up he's going to duel, I believe, with Lestat. And Louis knows that, like, Lestat can't lose that. Like, he can't. He's a vampire. And so, like, Babette could lose everything. And he really cares about her. He's protective about her. And so he, he tries to interfere. And she kind of cottons on. I don't think she fully, goes, oh, you're a vampire. But she cottons on to, how he's changed and he is not safe. And that really bothers him moving forward. So I think that covers that section. I'm so paying attention to the time now. And so that gets into this thing where Louis is more bisexual in the books, with Babette being one of the examples of his interest in women. And we're going to stick a pin in that and come back to it later after we do a little bit about the art of adaptation, because while I don't think the decision to include Babette's family negatively impacts the ability to understand the story, I think it's still easy to tell what the narrative is doing without the inclusion of that character and that subplot. So the art of adaptation is something that I referred to in previous videos. I've talked about how Louis and Claudia and Armand in AMC's adaptation are not white like they are in the books, and a little bit more on how Armand's backstory has been changed for AMC to accommodate Assad Zaman's heritage. So, adaptational changes, book to screen adaptations, has already been addressed, and it's something that I want to touch on here a little bit because it's something that I really want to focus on in a video coming up in March, scheduled for early March, where the art, science, alchemy of adaptation is going to be more important, play a more crucial role. And so just, again, building the foundation for that later conversation in a later movie. And I am trying to consult the script and keep an eye on time and wonder what my boys are up to. So again, I'm not bothered narratively by not including Babette and that subplot in her family. I don't think it impacts the ability to understand the story in any way. I also want to acknowledge, though, here's my caveat, my disclaimer for when I'm talking about adaptation, and that's that I saw the Lord of the Rings trilogy before I read the books. I was introduced to the movies, and I loved them so much that I was gifted the books after finishing 5th grade as like a little celebratory gift. So that means that I was introduced to a version of Fellowship of the Ring, Lord of the Rings more broadly. It does not include Tom Bombadil or Goldberry, which means I was super shocked and jarred and confused when I started reading the book, and here's these two characters that I was not expecting, and suddenly we're spending some time with them. And so to me, in my experience of the story, that section of the book slows down the pacing without really adding anything. I'm going to get so many haters for the way that I'm talking about Tom Bombadil and Goldberry. Oh dear. But it's true. That's the experience that I had reading it, like this summer after 5th grade. I probably went home that night and started reading the book. And it really confused me as well, because I felt like it undermined why it was necessary to destroy the ring. Because the whole idea with the ring is that it's so powerfully corrupt, anyone can fall for its manipulations. And therefore, like, the good guys can't use it. And they even talk about, like, sending it to Tom Bombadil. And it's like, no, because he'll forget he has it, and then, like, it could be stolen. There's this whole conversation about, like why, at the Council of Elrond, why they can't just, like, send the ring to Tom Bombadil. And we see, like, after all, if the ring is so powerfully evil and corrupting, preying on one's desires and fears, such as Boromir's dedication to Gondor and his fear that he's not going to be able to protect his people. We love Boromir in this house. We do not stand for Boromir hate. Do not insult Boromir here. Do not do it. We love him. He's amazing. But, like, if it's so dangerous, it's gotta be destroyed, cannot be allowed to exist, because, like, anyone could, like, fall under its spell. Why have a character that's totally immune? And then you have Faramir in the books. He says, like, I think his quote is something like, I wouldn't pick this thing up if it fell by the wayside. Doesn't that undermine the importance of destroying the ring? Because then it's not, like, it switches the focus, in my opinion, from how dangerous the ring is to, like, the individual person. Like, why can some people, like Faramir in the book, resist the ring, while others, like Smeagol, for instance, they fall under its like temptations, like, immediately. Like, he barely gets his hands on it. He barely even looks at it, right? And immediately he's under its control. And, like, it makes you wonder, like, what's so, I don't know, strong, noble, etc. about somebody like Faramir. What's wrong with someone like Smeagol? Like, why can't you just do better? Just resist. This person can. So anyway, as a result of that, all of that, to say, I am well aware that when I talk about adapting a book to screen, my perspective is going to be colored by the fact that I saw Lord of the Rings movies before I read the book, was introduced to a version of the story without Tom Bombadil and Goldberry, and never felt like it was lacking for the fact that they weren't included. And so I want to make sure I have that front and center when talking about the alchemy of adaptation. So, having said all of that about the art of adaptation and a really long rant about Fellowship of the Ring, but I think it's important for the context, I really want to get into the more of the analysis of Interview with the Vampire in 1994, the actual point of this video, and again, consulting my handy script. The first section that I have to talk about is homophobia and the fridge. It might not be what you're thinking, or it might. We'll find out. So I said in the prior section about adaptation that omitting Babette from 1994's Interview with the Vampire doesn't negatively impact the story, and I stand by that. But that's not to say that it doesn't affect the story at all. Like, you can still understand what's happening in Interview with the Vampire without her and her situation. But it does still have an impact on the story itself beyond the ability to follow along and understand the plot. So in the book, Louis is protective of Babette. He has some kind of feelings for her, which he never really seems to act on while human, and can't act on as a vampire, since in the books and also in the movie, vampires don't have that kind of attraction for them. Drinking blood, sharing blood, that is the highest form of pleasure. Everything else pales, both, I guess, in comparison. And they just don't even... I would think that they might be aware that other people would clock it if someone is attractive in that sense, but they don't. It's one of the things that everyone, regardless of appearance, regardless of whether or not they live up to human beauty standards of the time and place, is attractive to vampires. And I think that's cool. And anyway, so even after becoming a vampire, Louis is still really concerned and protective about her. His interest kind of changes a bit from going from human to vampire, but it's still present. He is still worried when Lestat's going to have this showdown that could result in that is going to result in Babette losing everything. And Louis' interest, as I said earlier, in Babette is one of the reasons why Louis is considered to be bisexual, generally assumed to be bisexual by fans. Again, book version. Which means that cutting that character from the film means cutting the one woman that Louis is shown being attracted to within that story. Arguably also the woman in the theater, but really it's Babette. While his relationship with Lestat, they live together, they raise a daughter together, is maintained, which could give the impression that Louis, the main character, the closest thing this movie has to a hero, again, the closest thing, he's a vampire still. I don't know that he's really a hero, but the closest thing the movie has to a hero could be perceived as gay in 1994. And I'm not saying that Neil Jordan himself was homophobic. He could have just been aware that the majority of the American audience at that time would be homophobic and felt he had to appease them. It could be, studio pressure because they got to make their money back. I'm not assigning motivations here to specific people. I am just acknowledging that regardless of the motivations involved, omitting Babette created a marketing and sales problem, because in 1994, how many people would show up, pay money at the theater to see a gay vampire show? Studio wants to make its money back. It wants to make a profit on this film. They gotta make sure to actually get butts in seats, right? So, relatedly, Babette is omitted, but also Louis' entire family from the book is also omitted from the story. Again, I said I'd get back to it. This is it. And that includes Paul and the effect that his suicide had on Louis in the book. Again, that was his big cynicism callous, his guilt, the feeling that he could have done more to support his brother, that he didn't stop Paul from deliberately falling. But two new characters were introduced in their place, an unnamed wife and child. See? Not only did the film version of Louis marry a woman, but crucially, he had a child with her. Louis marrying a woman was not enough to prove his interest in women, since it could be argued that she was a beard. The film version of Louis could still be perceived as gay, just closeted, especially given the time period in which Louis lived, in the time period that, most of the book and subsequently the movie is set in. So that's why it's important that Louis also states that he had a child, because despite the fact that, bisexuality exists and plenty of gay and lesbian people have had biological children with, their partners within heterosexual relationships, therefore, proving an attraction to women does not automatically or inherently negate an attraction to men. It was the 1990s. Those concepts weren't as commonly understood or accepted, and so the existence of a child would have been evidence that Louis couldn't possibly be gay. This is also not, addressing the existence of trans and non-binary people. That is also part of that conversation that, as I'm looking over my script, I probably should have been a bit more attentive to, so I'm putting it here in the video, trying to add that in. Not that I necessarily think, checking this too, it died on me last time. Is the little green light still on? The little green light is still on. Woohoo! Not that I necessarily think that the film version of Louis was meant to be read as heterosexual by everyone. Queer coding is a thing. So his relationship with Lestat is still present in the movie. They still raise Claudia together, who refers to both of them as her fathers. The relationship between Louis and Lestat itself still has, the Lestat vibes. And of course, there's the blood drinking metaphor, which, please, hopefully, 2026, hopefully, we all know that as a metaphor, different form of penetration, right? We know that. I don't have to explain that in 2026. We're all aware. Cool. Great. Queer coding. Biting as metaphor for, I don't know, this is going on various forms of social media. I don't know. I gotta say, I cuss and I swear a lot in real life, and I don't know how much I can get away with on here. Shoot, running out of time again. Okay, filming within CapCut might not be the best idea that I've ever had for a long video. See how this works in editing. Anyway, I think it's more likely, again, like the idea that Louis wasn't necessarily meant to be read as heterosexual by everybody. I think it's more likely that book fans, who are already aware of the relationship between Louis and Lestat, they're trusted to pick up on the truth of what's going on, the nature of their relationship, while the general audience, who's just here to see, vampires, was expected to just actually fall for the ruse of Louis' supposed heterosexuality as enacted by the implementation of a wife and child created just for the movie at the expense of Louis' family from the book. Louis' wife and child were like an escape hatch, giving Louis the cover of plausible deniability for homophobes who would have really taken the film to task. The idea of the gay vampire movie released to the masses, corrupting the audience, they would have had such a problem with it. Gotta try to cover it up somehow in a way that, like, the people who should know will still pick up on it. But there's problems with that. Omitting a female character just to create a wife and child, which I always think is supposed to be, the daughter, but that would still be relevant. I feel like whether or not it's a boy or a girl would still have some relevance. But anyway, whole cloth for the sole reason of passing off a male main character as straight for the sake of homophobes at the expense of also erasing the character's canon family, including a sister and a mother, is bad enough. However, it gets worse. Because Louis' wife and daughter are killed off prior to the movie even starting, Louis' narration as he's setting up his life in New Orleans, he's explaining to Daniel what his existence was prior to meeting Lestat. It makes it clear that they've already died. So that means that it's their deaths, not Paul's, that contribute to Louis' guilt-fueled, depressive, want-to-die state, which means they're not only invented to give Louis de Pointe-du-Lac plausible deniability for his sexuality, they also replace Paul as the initial catalyst for Louis' character arc. Louis is despairing, guilt-ridden, and suicidal because his wife and daughter died off-screen before the movie even starts. In short, they were created not just as a cover for Louis' sexuality, but also to be shoved in the fridge. And instead of dying in the opening scene, they're dead before the film even starts. TV Tropes, wonderful resource for storytellers. I have loved it for probably about 10 years now. Wow. Anyway, has a page on this. It's called Stuff in the Fridge, which defines what it means to fridge a character and explains its origins. Quote, "The term, sometimes referred to as fridging, was popularized by comic book writer Gail Simone through her website, Women in Refrigerators. On that site, Simone compiled a list of instances of female comic book characters who were killed off as a plot device. It is named for a storyline in Green Lantern: A New Dawn, in which the villain Major Force leaves the corpse of Kyle Rayner's girlfriend, Alexandra DeWitt, literally stuffed into a refrigerator for him to find. Years later, Major Force repeated the gimmick with Kyle's mother in an oven, it was just a trick with a mannequin that time, though. It does note that, quote, while the term most commonly applies to a male character's female love interest, it can actually be used in numerous different scenarios of all genders and different relations from romantic, platonic, and familial. TV Tropes doesn't list examples of fridging on that specific page, but does list several related tropes for examples to go under instead as a more specific organizing system. Among these are Collateral angst, which is defined as, a person is hurt, the focus is on their loved one's reaction. I let Gwen Stacy die. The hero feels responsible for loved one's death. The lost Lenore. A love interest dies prior to the story or very early on, and their death remains relevant to the lover and the story. And I can't do 4 very well. 4. Disposable woman. A minor female loved one is killed early on to motivate the hero to go do heroic things. She has little relevance afterwards. The page for the disposable woman trope in particular elaborates. For that matter, not all dead female characters are disposable. Writers can have the characters continue to mourn her long past the revenge arc, or develop the character in flashbacks and dream sequences. Such characters are the lost Lenore. Lenore continues to have a recognized impact on the characters and story after her demise, rather than conveniently vanishing from the minds of characters, audience, and creators after serving her function as catalyst. A disposable character, on the other hand, had almost zero characterization before she stopped appearing in the work. Louis's wife and child are never named. We don't know how old they were when they died. Really, any details about them. We don't see pictures of them. We certainly don't see them appear as themselves. They never appear in a flashback or a dream or hallucination. What were their names? How did Louis and his wife meet? Where was she from? What were her dreams? If she hadn't been a woman in 1790s colonial New Orleans, what would she have wanted to be? What did she want to be, even though she was a woman in colonial New Orleans? Had she wanted to be a mother? What was her favorite color? What music did she like listening to? What were her hobbies, her interests, her passions? Did she approve of slavery? Had she read Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Women? What did she think about the French Revolution? We never learn anything about Louis's wife and child because they were never meant to be real characters, just plot devices. They were created so that homophobes would believe that Louis was straight and to be the reason for Louis' suicidal ideation. After they're mentioned in Louis' initial narration, they're never referred to again, forgotten by the story as soon as they've served their purpose in the narrative. Which leads me to another part of the analysis, the kiss that did happen and the one that didn't. This fear of Louis being perceived as gay dovetails with another serious issue. In the movie, after Louis turns Madeline, Claudia finds him on the balcony and kisses him on the mouth. I don't know if the mic picked up on that, but my cats are playing chase. Later, after Claudia's death, Louis and Armand do this sort of gay chicken thing where they get about as close to kissing as humanly or inhumanly possible. They don't actually kiss. They get like this close. And then no. Because that'd be pretty gay, right? For Louis to kiss another man. But Claudia, portrayed by the then 11-year-old Kirsten Dunst, was made to have her first kiss on screen with Brad Pitt, whom she saw as an older brother, a man who was in his 30s. 2 grown men, consenting adults, kissing? Can't show that. But making an 11-year-old girl kiss a grown man on the mouth? That happens. And it doesn't escape my notice that while Louis and Armand's almost kiss would have been between 2 men, the kiss that Claudia gives Louis was heterosexual. I'm running out of time again. 4, 3, 2, 1. Imagine how strong the general homophobia, again, I'm not here to speculate on the bigotry or the motives of specific people, must have been that 2 grown men couldn't kiss on camera, but forcing a little girl to kiss a grown man was totally fine because, hey, at least it was a straight kiss. It's worth bringing up the book again, as well as the process of adaptation. In the book, are you having fun, boys? Good. Okay. In the book, Claudia's relationship with Louis does take an unhealthy turn. A literal adult trapped in the body of a little girl, Claudia develops feelings for Louis that further her hatred of being stuck in a child's body, knowing he's not going to reciprocate. Louis himself, despite mostly referring to Claudia as his daughter, in my opinion, he doesn't entirely not reciprocate. He sometimes speaks of her or treats her in ways that are a little eyebrow raising as a reader. But here's the thing, though, that really gets to me about the situation. The book version of Claudia exists on page and in the imaginations of Anne Rice and the readers. Kirsten Dunst was a real girl. Of course, now she's, a real adult. But at the time, she was an actual child existing. It's one thing to put on a page a relationship between a father and an adopted daughter, wherein the daughter is herself an adult woman trapped in the body of a child. It's another to force a real child to kiss an actual, real grown man. The former is uncomfortable, but in a way that's expected for the gothic horror genre. It often deals with some pretty uncomfortable themes. You go into gothic horror knowing you're probably going to be disturbed by something, probably multiple things. And in a sense, like, it's just letters typed on a page, right? The latter situation involves an actual real life girl and consent that is at best questionable. Because what freedom did Kirsten Dunst, who was a child at the beginning of her career, this is her big debut in such a prominent and iconic role, like what right does she, like what freedom, not what right, what freedom did she have to refuse? And for that matter, why didn't Brad Pitt, who was, an adult with an established film career and therefore greater agency, why didn't he just refuse? Why didn't he leverage that to be like, no, this isn't happening. I get that it's in the script. It's not happening. I'm not doing that to her. I am not letting her do that to me. No, we're not doing that. Overruled. Or did he and we just have never heard about it? I don't know. But I do think that it's especially important to talk about this in our post-Me Too society, in which the crimes of Woody Allen, Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, Sean Combs have been not just revealed, because I think in some cases, like I'm not fully read up on all of them at the moment, but like there have been rumors, right? There had been allegations, accusations. They haven't been just like revealed, but also taken with varying degrees of seriousness. It's a society in which Jeanette McCurdy's memoir, I'm Glad My Mom Died, exists, in which documentaries like Investigation Discovery's documentary Quiet on Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV exists, and former child stars such as Allison Stoner and I believe it's Cole Sprouse have spoken up about their experiences as children in the entertainment industry. Stories such as the Ruby Franke scandal have put more attention on mommy bloggers and how their children should be protected and compensated. this is also a world grappling with the reality of the Epstein files, their existence, who's in them, what acts they document, whose information is being redacted, and who's really being protected by the DOJ, which hasn't released the full files, almost 2 months after the deadline, like over a month and a half after the deadline. Where does Kirsten Dunst, who I believe I remember from an interview that I just read in preparation for the script, it did say that she had been in a Woody Allen movie. Where does that fall in the context of all of this? She's spoken out against the kiss literally since the press tour for this movie, talking about how gross it was and how uncomfortable it was and how she saw him as a brother and she's so much older than him. Where does her experience having to kiss Brad Pitt for Interview with a Vampire fall in the context of exploitation? I think that's worth talking about. And then the last issue I want to address here is biphobia. So I've talked quite a bit by now about the lengths that production went to in order to pass off Louis Duponc-Dulac, all people, as heterosexual, after omitting Babette from the story. They created a wife and child to launder Louis' sexuality, but never bothered to show them, since they never mattered in and of themselves. Their purpose was to pass Louis off as straight, which was achieved just by having Louis mention their existence once, and since they didn't matter to the actual story, Louis' narration establishes that they died before the film even began. And by having them be already dead, they effectively replaced Paul as the catalyst for Louis' despair. Paul may have been adapted out for efficiency's sake. Might as well conserve precious runtime by having the new wife and daughter pull double duty as Louis' cynicism catalyst, because after all, it was a 1990s theatrical release. The idea of sitting there for 3 hours like some movies are now, that wasn't as common, right? But by omitting Paul, the film also omits Louis' sister and mother, resulting in 2 more women erased from the story. Now it's time to look at a different side of that issue. I mentioned in a previous section that Louis having had a wife and child doesn't actually indicate heterosexuality, since closeted gay and lesbians have had biological children in heterosexual relationships. But we're certainly meant to assume that if Louis isn't gay, he must be straight. Except that this mindset completely erases bisexuality as a possibility. What if Louis did love his wife and also loved Lestat and had feelings toward Armand? What if, for that matter, Louis was actually attracted to men more than women, with his late wife being one of the few women that caught his eye? The existence of Louis' wife and children doesn't actually prove that Louis is straight, except in the minds of those who acknowledge the validity of bisexuality, even less than they'll respect homosexuality. It does actually give more weight to the notion that Louis is actually bisexual. But that's not what I want to talk about in this section. I've talked a lot about Louis' sexuality. Here, I want to talk about the 2 characters who don't get the plausible deniability of a dead wife and child, whose bisexuality is therefore more overt: Lestat and Armand. Lestat is portrayed... I'll just continue importing into CapCut. I don't know. Lestat is portrayed as he's depicted in a 1976 novel, with the exception of 2 details which I think might the subtle hints that someone in production was aware of 1985's The Vampire Lestat. The fact that he lets Claudia attack him when she realizes that she can't age, which is shown in the film by Claudia cutting her hair and watching it regrow. This scene doesn't happen in the book, in which Claudia's confrontation about which of her fathers made her and how occurs differently. But a similar scene does happen in The Vampire Lestat. In that book, Gabrielle, Lestat's mother, cuts her hair to the lengths typically worn by men at the time on her first night as a vampire. But the next night, she's horrified to discover that it grew back during the day. She angrily asks Lestat, she's screaming. Okay, she's sobbing, she's screaming. Like, this is serious business for her. She angrily asks Lestat if he knew that would happen to her, and he apologizes, saying he should have thought to warn her, because he'd already observed like his nails would grow back during the day. It's not an immediate thing like the movie shows. It does take the day. But it genuinely hadn't occurred to him. It hadn't crossed his mind. To be fair, he was under a little bit of stress at the time. Like, she was not going to, like, survive the night regardless. Like, she was out of time. Anyway. In the 1994 film adaptation of Interview with a Vampire, which debuted almost a full decade after The Vampire Lestat was published, Lestat allows Claudia to yell at him and cut up his face, which is something that, in my opinion, I don't think Lestat, like the book version of Lestat in Interview, I don't think he would have done that. In my opinion, it might be a sign of hidden guilt that he let her do that because on some level, like, he feels he deserves it, which would be closer to his depiction in later books. And that's still not my point. That's just, I didn't want to say that he's completely the same as in the books, because there is this one, like these two little details and this one scene that makes me go, but it was just something related that I thought I ought to observe. Now, the point I'm trying to make here, getting to it now, is that aside from that one scene, Lestat is depicted in the 1994 movie as he was in the book it was based on. The shallow, selfish hedonist who doesn't really care about anyone or anything other than what he wants. The controlling monster keeping Louis and Claudia in a cage at the mercy of his mercurial whims, while he shows no regard for human life. The cruel and vindictive partner who, upon deciding to baby-trap Louis to force Louis to stay with him, chooses all the children in New Orleans, Claudia in particular, which to me almost comes across like spite and malice after Louis' earlier encounter with her. Like, he could have picked any kid, but he picked that one that, like, Louis is torn up about. This version of Lestat, taken in isolation from the rest of the novels, deserves what he gets when Claudia kills him and Louis lets her do it. And while Lestat is shown feeding from women, he's also shown leading a young man away from a party. There's also, of course, his relationship with Louis and his past situationship with Armand. Lestat, the antagonist for most of the movie, gets to be openly bisexual. The same could be said of Armand, the antagonist for the last act or so of the movie. He dresses up as Gentleman Death and kills the woman on stage, which is what Santiago does in AMC's adaptation. It's actually Armand who does that in the book and the movie. During Louis and Claudia's first visit to the theater, but his entire motivation for killing Claudia is to have Louis for himself. As Claudia herself warned Louis after their first meeting with him, ranted about that the last episode. or the last, episode's fine. He would not have me in the way. Armand had Claudia killed, believing that Louis would eventually get over the pain of losing her, and that the two of them would live happily ever after together. There's also, of course, his past situationship with Lestat. The only two characters who just get to be bisexual without production bending over backward to try to make them appear straight to soothe the fragile psyches of homophobes are the two antagonists. Of course, this isn't something that's novel, that's limited to only 1994's Interview with a Vampire. Disney is infamous for queer coding its villains, and the James Bond franchise also gets some flack for that. It's a problem in and of itself. I have dry eyes, so just pardon me, I'm not able to see out of this one for right now. Allergies, am I right? It's a problem in and of itself that harkens back to the Hays Code. Huge deal in cinema in the way that so many things were depicted for decades, including homosexuality. And I could do a whole separate video on like the Hays Code. I know lots of people have already done that. But the Hays Code specified that, like, if the character was homosexual, that character had to be punished. There had to be negative consequences for a character's homosexuality, lest audiences get the idea that, it's okay to be gay. Antagonists could be gay because nobody's supposed to like them or look up to them, and of course the antagonist can only face justice at the end of the story, so they would get that punishment required by the Hays Code. Heroes, though, those are potential role models, right? People are supposed to look up to them and root for them and hope that they triumph at the end of the story against the antagonist, and I'm flipping pages in the wrong direction. So it's a little bit harder for them to be straight because I'm like, harder for them to be gay because I'm like, where's their punishment for it, right? So that's why queer coding was developed in the first place. It was a way to sneak homosexuality, bisexuality past the censors, including it in the story in a way that they're not going to be likely to pick up on. And while they did pick up on some things, they did miss quite a bit. You kind of wonder, you watch and you wonder, how on earth did they not pick up on that? How did that get past the censors, the moral guardians? How? But it's even more of a problem when the characters go out of their way to pass off the closest thing the story has to a hero who was bisexual in the book as straight. While, again, the two main antagonists, bi. Louis, the sympathetic protagonist, caught in the clutches of first Lestat and then Armand, gets a dead wife and child to prove that he's heterosexual. Supposedly. Prove heterosexual. Lestat and Armand, the abusive partners who don't care about humans and revel in being monsters, are left as bisexual. Not really a great look. Villainous, bisexual, preying on people. Not great. So all of that to say, conclusion, what do I think of 1994's Interview with the Vampire? It's complicated, as so much is with this franchise. On the one hand, I think it's a solid adaptation of the book. I think it's actually one of the better book-to-screen adaptations that we have. Like, if I were to list the best, like, most faithful adaptations, Interview with the Vampire would be on that list. I don't have a problem with anyone's acting, as I talked about earlier, like even Brad Pitt's. I think Kirsten Dunst is far and away the most impressive, just for being able to turn in such a powerful performance as a child. Like, the adults have had more time to hone their craft and their talent. Kirsten Dunst was a little girl and did so well in her role. And then getting to Antonio Banderas, again, said I would, back in the beginning, said I would. Here it is. Antonio Banderas did a good job of portraying Armand as he was depicted in that first book. Again, the film seems to take Interview with a Vampire in isolation without factoring in later books, which at the time included 1988's Queen of the Damned and 1992's Tale of the Body Thief. Armand doesn't really factor much into the latter, but Anne's perspective on Armand changed while writing The Queen of the Damned, specifically the very beloved Devil's Minion chapter. After writing that, Armand became a much more sympathetic character, less of a pure villain, more complicated. The sets and the costumes were all well done. I'm particularly obsessed with Claudia's blue dress. Amazing. And Stan Winston's company, that whole thing, great job with the makeup and the prosthetics. I think it is a good adaptation. And in terms of things like characterization, set design, pacing, it's a good movie. I just also think that the movie has major problems with homophobia, biphobia, misogyny, and making a little girl kiss a grown man, which makes the movie a bit difficult for me to watch. There's also the fact that the film does seem to take Interview in isolation, which makes me feel like I'm not watching the real characters, just the characters as Louis chose to depict Daniel in 1976. In particular, Lestat doesn't feel like Lestat, and Armand doesn't seem like Armand. Tom Cruise's Lestat doesn't have the warmth, light, and empathy that Lestat is later shown to have. Would Antonio Banderas' Armand be obsessed with blenders or wake Daniel up in the middle of the night to see if it was really possible to use a telephone to talk to someone in Paris from the United States? I think the movie is worth watching at least once for the experience. While being prepared to face some bigotry, it's worth viewing to see the first screen adaptation of Anne Rice's novels, Kirsten Dunst's performance, and the amazing work of the crew, including Stan Winston's school. After that, personally, I could take it or leave it. And that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, getting through all of my little clips here and there that I'm going to sew together. Tune in next weekend for another video, and in the meantime, don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, clicking all the buttons. Thank you guys so much for watching along. Bye everybody.